There are moments in history when power doesn't disappear overnight. It doesn't collapse in flames, it doesn't announce its exit, and it doesn't ask permission. Instead, it fades quietly, through spreadsheets, bond markets, and balance sheets. In 1945, Britain still looked like a global empire. Its flag flew across continents. Its navy still patrolled key trade routes. Its leaders still spoke with the confidence of a superpower. But behind the scenes, the foundation was already gone. The empire wasn't defeated by rebellion. It wasn't undone by ideology. And it didn't end because Britain suddenly changed its values. It ended because the money ran out. And here's the uncomfortable part. The trap Britain fell into wasn't obvious. It wasn't reckless. And it didn't feel dangerous at the time. In fact, it felt responsible. Measured, temporary, manageable, until it wasn't. Tonight, we're going to examine the financial mechanism that dismantled the most powerful empire in history. Not emotionally, not politically, but structurally. And more importantly, we're going to examine why the same structural conditions are now forming elsewhere. Not because history repeats perfectly, but because systems behave the same way under pressure. Stay with me, because the most important realization in this story comes near the end, and it changes how you see power itself. To understand the trap, we need to start with a simple truth that history often disguises. Military power follows financial power, not the other way around. At the start of the 20th century, Britain wasn't just an empire, it was the financial core of the world. London was where global capital moved. British banks financed railroads, ports, mines, and trade across continents. Insurance, shipping, commodities, all flowed through British institutions. And most importantly, the British pound wasn't just money. It was the world's money. International trade settled in pounds. Central banks held pounds as reserves. Global contracts were denominated in sterling. This gave Britain a unique advantage. It could borrow cheaply. It could run deficits without panic. It could finance wars, infrastructure, and global administration with ease. This is what reserve currency status really means. It's not prestige, it's permission. Permission to consume more than you produce. Permission to delay consequences. Permission to stretch reality. But this permission is not permanent, and Britain discovered that slowly, then suddenly. The first crack appeared during World War I. Britain entered the war as the world's banker. It exited as the world's debtor. The cost of the war wasn't just human, it was financial on a scale never seen before. To fund the conflict, Britain borrowed heavily. It raised taxes dramatically, it liquidated overseas investments, and eventually it suspended the gold standard. This last decision mattered more than most people realize. For generations, the pound had been trusted because it was convertible into gold. That promise anchored global confidence. When Britain broke that link, it gained flexibility, but lost certainty. At the time, this felt necessary. Temporary, justified by survival, and it worked. Britain won the war. But winning the war masked losing something far more important: financial dominance. After the war, Britain faced a choice: adjust to a new economic reality, or attempt to restore the old one. It chose restoration. Britain returned to the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate, a move that made the pound artificially strong. This decision strangled exports, weakened industry, and locked Britain into deflation. But politically, it preserved the illusion of strength, and illusions are expensive. Through the 1920s and 30s, Britain still appeared powerful. The empire remained vast. The institutions remained intact. But beneath the surface, the economy struggled. Unemployment stayed high. Industrial competitiveness declined. Debt service became a permanent burden. And then came World War II. This wasn't just another war. This was a financial point of no return. Britain fought World War II through total mobilization. At its peak, more than half of the nation's economic output went directly to the war effort. This level of spending is difficult to comprehend. It meant factories repurposed overnight, civilian consumption slashed, rationing across society. And once again, Britain borrowed massively, this time primarily from the United States. Through programs like Lend-Lease, Britain received the resources it needed to survive. But survival came with conditions. By the end of the war, Britain's national debt had reached levels previously unimaginable. In modern terms, it would be measured in trillions. And yet, here is the critical mistake. Britain believed the debt could be managed because it always had been before. This belief was the trap, because the world Britain emerged into was no longer structured around Britain. At Bretton Woods, a new global financial system was created, and this time, Britain was not designing the rules. The US dollar became the new reserve currency. Global trade and finance reorganized around American institutions. Gold reserves concentrated in the United States. This shift was not symbolic, it was structural. Reserve currency status determines who absorbs global shocks and who transmits them. For generations, Britain had enjoyed this position. Now, it didn't. But Britain still carried the obligations of empire. Military bases, colonial administrations, global security commitments. This mismatch, obligations without privilege, is where decline accelerates. Britain tried to maintain the pound's value. It defended exchange rates. It resisted devaluation. Each defense drained reserves. Each delay reduced options. This is how financial traps work. They don't collapse suddenly. They narrow choices gradually. The illusion finally shattered in 1956. The Suez Crisis wasn't just a geopolitical event. It was a financial revelation. Britain, alongside allies, acted militarily to secure the canal. On the battlefield, the operation succeeded. But then the United States intervened, not militarily, but financially. By threatening currency pressure and blocking access to emergency funding, the U.S. exposed the truth. Britain could not act independently. The pound was vulnerable. Reserves were limited. Confidence was fragile. Britain withdrew, and the world understood. From that moment on, British power existed only with external approval. The empire was still visible, but hollow. After Suez, the decline became undeniable. Repeated devaluations followed. Economic stagnation deepened. Capital flowed outward. By the 1970s, Britain faced inflation, labor unrest, and chronic deficits. In 1976, the final humiliation arrived. Britain turned to the International Monetary Fund for assistance. The empire that once underwrote global finance now accepted conditions imposed by others, not because of incompetence, but because the financial structure had collapsed. This is the trillion-dollar trap. Debt accumulated under privilege. Privilege disappeared. Debt remained. Now pause here, because this is where the comparison to the present begins, carefully, responsibly, and without prediction. The United States today occupies the financial position Britain once held. The dollar remains the world's primary reserve currency. U.S. debt is widely held. American financial markets anchor global liquidity. This provides enormous advantages, but it also creates incentives, persistent deficits, delayed adjustments, rising obligations. For decades, the system functioned smoothly. But systems don't break when they stop working. They break when they stop adapting. Today, the U.S. faces structural pressures, rising interest costs, demographic shifts, long-term entitlement obligations, geopolitical commitments. None of this implies collapse, but it does imply constraint. And constraint is the early signal history always leaves behind. If this analysis is resonating so far, stay with me, because the final section explains why timing, not magnitude, is the real risk. Britain didn't collapse because its debt was the largest in history. It collapsed because its debt grew faster than its capacity to manage it. In a slower world, this took decades. Today's world moves faster. Capital reacts instantly. Confidence shifts quickly. Markets price risk continuously. This doesn't make collapse inevitable. It makes miscalculation expensive. The lesson from Britain isn't that empires fall. It's that financial flexibility determines survival. When flexibility disappears, power becomes performative. The final question? History leaves us with is not about destiny, it's about awareness. Britain didn't recognize the trap until exit was impossible. Whether others do remains an open question. History doesn't repeat loudly, it repeats quietly, until suddenly it doesn't. If you want to keep examining how financial systems shape power, so beyond headlines and politics, consider subscribing. And in the comments, consider this. What do you think modern history will identify as the moment when constraints became visible? Because history suggests every system has one.